All right, so we're going to talk about the eye and our sense of vision. So there is just a single type of receptor in the eye, and it is the photoreceptor. But we have a couple of types of photoreceptors in our eyes. We have rods and we have cones. And we're going to talk a little bit about how those function in just a second. But I want to kind of give you a chance to kind of label your diagram in your notes and talk a little bit about the structures that we see. So we have our eyelid. This is a protective flap of skin that helps prevent the eye from getting damaged. The pupil is actually just an opening. It's not exactly a structure. It's just a hole produced by the iris that surrounds the pupil. The iris is a sphincter muscle, which means it is a circular shaped muscle, and it can expand, making the pupil look larger, or it can contract, narrowing the pupil. And then we also have the white of the eye, which is the sclera. Moving inside the eye, we have the iris again. You can see it here in cross section. You can also see some other things like the cornea. The cornea is the clear coating that coats the eye. It is protective, but it also serves the function of helping to allow light to pass into the eye. Then we have the lens. The lens is there for focusing light and helping to reflect it back onto the retina. The inside of the eye is filled with a semi-gelatinous fluid called the vitreous humor. If you've ever had like a floaty in your eye, which is like a gray spot or like a little squiggly line, what you are actually seeing there is a protein in the vitreous humor that is clumping up together with other proteins, and those are actually floating down through the vitreous humor and settling in the bottom of the eye. And what you're seeing is the shadow cast by them onto your retina. And then we have, we talked about the sclera. Now we have the retina. The retina is where our photoreceptors are located, and it lines the inside of the eye. And I want to make sure you understand that this is coding in 3 dimensions. Your eye is almost spherical, and so the retina is in fact coding in those 3 dimensions. Because we have to do this in cross section, so often it's hard to realize that the retina extends in all 3 dimensions. The exception is where the optic nerve enters the eye. The optic nerve enters into the eye at what we call the blind spot. So where the optic nerve enters, there is no retina. And so that is the spot of the eye that does not have any sensory capability. It is just the relay point to the rest of the brain through the optic nerve. The choroid is the support layer of the eye. It is the one that's going to be like the blood supply that helps, nourish the retina and keep the eye healthy. All right, so here you have an example of what's going on with our sensory cells. Those sensory cells, remember, are rods and cones. And I'm going to zoom in on those rods and cones even further. So here are our rods and cones. The rods sense light and dark. That is their function. They detect light or they detect darkness. So they are how bright something is. The cones are able to sense color, but our cones only come in 3 varieties. Those cones are red, green, or blue. And all of the colors that we see are actually combinations of how many of our red cones, how many of our green cones, how many of our blue cones are firing. The whole spectrum of color that we are able to develop and see is based around how many of these cones are firing at any given time. And color blindness is actually a situation where you could have not enough cones, so you don't develop enough of a certain type of cone. So your eye compensates by having others fire. Color blindness is kind of a misnomer in that you're not actually incapable of seeing color. Colorblind individuals actually see color, but they can't distinguish between colors like a person who has who does not have color blindness would. They see certain colors as the same, and they cannot distinguish between them. Common forms are red and green color blindness, where you cannot distinguish between reds and greens. And then blue-green color blindness is also a very common one. There are also some other varieties like red-orange or orange-green or blue-purple. And generally, when we have a broad category like red-green color blindness, what's happened is we've lost either the red or the green cones. We make one or the other. And so those colors look exactly the same because what happens is red and green pick up for each other. So if we do not have red cones, then the green cones will fire when we see red and green. If we have blue-green color blindness, same thing is we have blue, we may be missing blue or we may be missing green, and the other will pick up for that missing cone. When we have the more narrower varieties like blue-purple, where you can't distinguish between blues and purples, generally what that means is that you make some blue cones, but you don't make enough to be into the normal range. You have a depleted number of blue cones, and so you get kind of a skewed color scale. So I just wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. Of course, with all of these things, it could be malformation, so we don't make enough of the cones, or it could be damage. The cones could exist, but they may not be hooked up correctly to the optic nerve. All sorts of things can happen. So just realize that there may be multiple underlying causes on a cellular level that result in, at a macro level, the same outcome. Same thing with blindness overall. Blindness can either be due to damage, and it could be to any number of parts of the eye, or it could be a malformation of any of these things. So one of the things that we have now are glasses and contacts that allow people to refocus their vision. But before, all you had to rely on was your actual eyes. And sometimes the lens is thicker or narrower than it should be. And so the light does not reflect properly back onto the retina, making it blurry, either far away or close up is the most common. Although there are some people who have middle distance. And so now with glasses, we can correct that. We can change the focus length in order to allow the eye to see. So any of these could cause problems. Like if we have damage to the optic nerve, the eye could be perfectly functioning, but it is not transmitting any of that information back to the brain. And so effectively we have blindness. So just some kind of food for thought there around like what is causing these kinds of things. And that is going to wrap up our video about the eyes.